Welcome to the Ain't That the Truth podcast. I'm Rev Melissa, your host. We are here to proclaim that truth's name is Jesus. We rely on the Bible to explore, understand, and grow in absolute truth. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ain't That the Truth. I am Rev Melissa, your host, and I am excited to be with you all today. I'm excited about the topic in which we're talking about. It's something that I actually got to preach this past Sunday at my church, but instead of just putting the sermon from Sunday out there, I wanted to share it personally with you all because pretty much since Sunday, there's been a lot of times where this sermon I've kind of had to put into practice a lot. That's typically how it works, is that you can ask any pastor out there. If they preach a sermon, typically that next week to follow, they're going to realize what they were not just preaching to the congregation, but they were preaching to themselves for sure. And that's the way that it should be, because you should never look at a pastor or a preacher as somebody who is perfect, but they are growing just like everybody else and maturing in their faith as well. So the topic that we're going to be talking about today is desperate for Jesus. And as I had told you guys before, at my church, we've been doing this series that we'll be wrapping up this following Sunday. We've been doing this series on intimacy with Jesus. And I had the opportunity to preach the sermon about the things that kind of keep us from intimacy with Jesus. And as I was preparing the sermon, I already had one written. It was like 2 weeks before I was actually supposed to preach it, and I was excited. I already had the sermon typed out. I had the PowerPoint done. Like, I was super excited and ready to go. Felt like I was like early for once and just got everything done, and I was super excited. And then the Lord was like, skirt, I'm putting you in a different direction, and spoke to me about something else in regards to that topic. And so I pretty much had to scratch the sermon that I had written and completely write one, but it definitely was what the Lord was speaking to the congregation, and I believe what the Lord was speaking to me personally, and then hopefully will be a blessing to you all as well. So we're talking about desperation for Jesus. When I think about what stops people from intimacy with Jesus, honestly, the biggest one is that we oftentimes don't realize our desperate need for Jesus. And that keeps us from the intimacy that Jesus desires to have with us and that we should desire to have with him. So desperation, if you look at the definition of desperation, it is having a great need and desire for something. So having a great need. We are in need of Jesus every day. We are not breathing. We are not living. We have no hope, no peace, no joy, no strength. We have nothing apart from Jesus. So that great need is there. But not only should that great need be there and is there, but there should be that great desire for him. You know, the Bible talks a lot about desires, and in Psalm 37, delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. It talks about letting go of the evil desires that we once had before we came to know Christ, and picking up his desires for our life. And so it's having a great desire for him. So we have a great need and a great desire for him. It is realizing that on our own, we cannot make anything happen. And oftentimes in our culture today, the word desperation has a negative connotation because we think about, oh, well, that person's desperate. They're going after any man or any woman that they can find because they're desperate to find somebody. And so we kind of think of the word desperation in a negative view. But desperation can actually be a great thing if we're desperate for the right one. And his name is Jesus. And so we are to be a desperate people, but desperate for him and nothing else that this world would have to offer. We, especially in the American church, have become so independent, or so we think. We think that we can do things on our own, and we have neglected to understand that apart from Jesus, there's no life, there's no hope, there's no provision, there's no strength. Apart from Jesus, there's nothing. Every moment of every day, we need Jesus. We are hopeless and helpless without him. And the definition of hopeless means to be in despair, inadequate, and incompetent. And I found that to be very interesting because we are in complete despair without him. We are inadequate without him. Again, we can't do anything apart from him. And we are incompetent without him. And I know that some of you are thinking, oh, okay, this is not a very encouraging podcast. But let me tell you, this actually is. Because when we realize how hopeless and helpless we are without Jesus, it kind of takes the stress off of us. Because we realize that we can just surrender things to him and leave things in his hands instead of trying to play lowercase g gods in our life, which is what we tend to do. I know for me personally, I'm a misfix-it, especially when it comes to my own life and my problems. Like I sometimes have a hard time asking others for help and telling others that I'm struggling. And so instead, I want to try to pick up the pieces, the broken pieces, and I want to try to fit things together. And how can I make this work? And how can I make this happen? And all of this. And I try, in a sense, to just control my own life and to control everything. And that adds so much anxiety and stress that honestly does not need to be there and should not be there, because anxiety and stress is not of him. And if I just realize that I desperately need Jesus, I can't fix this on my own, and just take that time to say, okay, Jesus, it's in your hands, it takes the pressure off of me. Now, he may ask me to do certain things in order to fix the situation, but he'll ask me to do it, and I'll know what to do and not trying to figure it out on my own, because his ways are much higher and greater and way better than anything that I could come up with on my own. And so, honestly, this sermon should, or podcast rather, should give us a sense of relief. That we can just rely on him, because that's what an intimate relationship is when you rely on somebody else. When a man and a woman are married, when they're husband and wife, they rely on each other. So when the wife is struggling and needs help, the husband can be there to be the protector, to be the provider, to be the stability that the wife needs. And in turn, the wife can be the same for the husband. And it's a beautiful situation, and it should be that way and more with us and Jesus. And so that's kind of what I picture is as us having just that connection with Jesus, that he is all that we need. He fills the gap when we fall short. And so then, as I was thinking about it, I was looking in Psalm 84, and the writers of Psalm 84 says that my soul longs and even faints for the living God. They understood in their inner core they could not go on without the strength of Jesus. That's something that I love about the book of Psalm, is that it's oftentimes just so raw and real and full of just like, this is how it is. Like, I'm either on the high top where I'm praising Jesus, or I'm in my low. Where are you at, Jesus? I need you. I'm falling apart. And I love how raw and real the book of Psalm is. And so there, the authors are just realizing, I can't make it without Jesus, and my soul will faint and I will wither without him. So then I was looking in the New Testament and found two examples of people who were desperate for Jesus. So they were hopeless and in despair without him. And the first one is found in Luke chapter 8. And it's the woman with the issue of blood. And it said there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And so, let's break this down. So back in that culture, when women had their monthly discharge, back in biblical times, it was kind of considered, they were considered unclean. and especially in Old Testament times, but also just in general, if there was an issue of blood, that person was seen as like kind of like an outcast of society. Don't be around her, don't touch her, she is tainted. And so for her to even just be around everybody else was already just like that's a no-go. And then not only to that, but push through the crowd to touch Jesus was definitely something that was risky on her part. She was risking her life because they could have um, stoned her. They could have done whatever they wanted to her because that was considered, just something that was against the rules of that time. But she understood that she was desperate for Jesus. That if she didn't get to Jesus and get healing from him, that there was going to be no other hope. She knew that she had tried all the physicians. She had tried everything here on earth to possibly fix the issue. And she knew that apart from Jesus, she was going to remain in this despair that she had been living in for so long. And so she did whatever it took to get to Jesus. That's how desperate we should be in our life, that we do whatever it takes, no matter how risky, no matter how it's going to look to other people, that we do whatever it takes to get to Jesus. Absolutely, that should be our goal at all times, whatever it takes to get to Jesus. The second account in the Bible is the man that was lowered through the roof, and that's found in Luke chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. It says, on one of those days, as he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there, who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea, and from Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was with him to heal. And behold, some men were bringing on a bed a man who was paralyzed, and they were seeking to bring him in and lay him before Jesus. But finding no way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and let him down with his bed through the tiles into the midst before Jesus. And when he saw their faith, he said, man, your sins are forgiven. Oh, to have that level of desperation for Jesus. To be that hungry and thirsty for Jesus. To be that just, I need Jesus. To have that kind of attitude. So much so that you're willing to be lowered from the roof if that means that you get to receive a touch from Jesus. Again, the crowd was not happy that this happened, and they were whispering and all kinds of stuff, and Jesus had to address it um, later on in the story. But this guy knew his case was desperate, just like the woman with the issue of blood. He knew that the only way to receive healing, the only way for his problem to be resolved, the only way for things to be better in his life was to get to Jesus, to get that touch from Jesus. And he did whatever it took to get to Jesus. Like I said, oh, to have that kind of hunger and thirst for Jesus that nothing else satisfies. When we reach that level of intimacy and desperation, we will desire to constantly abide and dwell in his presence. It says that he is the vine and we are the branches, and the branches have to abide in the vine, because if they're cut off from the vine, they die. They don't produce fruit. And so if we want to be a people that produce fruit, and we want to be alive and well spiritually, we cannot be cut off from Jesus. We have to abide in him. He has to be our source of everything in order for us to be the fruitful people that he has called us to be. And it also takes being aware of his presence even in the most mundane moments of the day. And this point is something that really kind of has struck out to me, because it is so easy. I'm pretty busy in my life, and it is so easy sometimes just to go about my day thinking I've got to do this, and I've got to do that, and this task is set before me, and that task is set before me, and then I've got to go do this, and then I've got that to do. and to get my focus off of what really matters, and that's being connected with Jesus to do his work here on earth. And having that realization and that recognition of being in his presence in every moment of every day really does change things. And I've been really practicing, because it takes practice to have that intentional being consciously aware of his presence every moment of every day. That takes practice to not get distracted. That takes intentionality to not get distracted. And so I've really, in my own personal life, really been working on that. And since I have, like, it has been a game changer for me, because, when something goes on and I start to feel anxiety or stress, or like just overwhelmed, or God, I don't know, I feel like I'm failing. I don't know what to do. I can say no in this moment. Let me feel his presence. Let me be guided by him, so he can tell me what to do in this moment. So he can be my peace in this moment. So he can be my joy in this moment. So he can be my strength and all that I need in this moment. It has been an absolute game changer. And part of that being aware of his presence is being in constant communication with him. We've talked about that before, but it says in First Thessalonians, it tells us that we are to be to pray without ceasing. So to be in constant communication with Jesus. And I found that my prayer life, some people, their prayer life is kind of very rigid, where like they'll set a time, whether it's in the morning or in the evening, and they'll spend like 30 minutes in prayer, or whatever the case may be. I do have sometimes moments where I spend longer periods of time in prayer, but I found that the majority of my prayer life is like spurts throughout the day. That throughout my day, I'm in communication with Jesus about different things as they come to my mind, and just talking with Jesus throughout the day. And I've noticed, like, again, that helps because I'm recognizing his presence in my life in various moments of my day, even in those most mundane moments. I want to be a resident of his presence and not just an occasional visitor. I believe that there's a lot of Christians out there that, okay, I'll experience the presence of Jesus on Sunday mornings when I go to church. And then for those, 20 minutes maybe in the morning whenever I'm doing my devotional, as a good, Christian should. But really, what Jesus desires is for us to be a resident of his presence, which means to constantly, again, just to constantly abide in him, and to constantly be aware of his presence and his leading in our life. And then once we completely are in desperation for him, we will surrender and no longer want control. Like I said before, we'll no longer try to control the situations in our life, but we will surrender them to Jesus, knowing that he knows best. We will return to that childlike faith, and that faith will hang on every word spoken by Jesus. This includes every promise and every command. When we think about childlike faith, I think about, in the typical situation, with a kid, if they have really good parents, and parents that are there and that are present, they're gonna hang on every word. Oh, well, my dad said this, or my mom said it's like this, and they'll believe their parents. They hang on the words of their parents, and they believe that what their parents are telling them is truth, and it is good. That's the way that it should be with Jesus, that we hang on every word, that we're mesmerized by every word that he speaks, knowing that it is true, that it is perfect, that it is that it's holy, and that it's for our betterment and for the betterment of those around us. Desperation, again, is surrender. It's the act of letting go. And it is not a passive state of giving up, but actively relinquishing control to the Savior of the universe. Like I said, it's an intentional action, but the choice is ours. And we when we think about this, we can think about he should be the only one that we would want to surrender control to. He can have the good, the bad, and the ugly, because he is the only one that can fix our mess. He is the only one, and he delights when we come to him, even in our mess. He delights when we abide in him, despite the mess that we're in. He delights when we give up control to him. And I don't know about you, but if I'm going to be desperate for somebody, if I'm going to be in an intimate relationship and constant communication with someone, I want it to be the great I am, the one with all the answers, the one who saved my soul, the one who died on the cross for my sins, the one that loves me with an everlasting love. That is who I want an intimate relationship with. That is who I want my focus. That is who I want my focus to remain on. That I want to delight in. That I want to go to first and foremost when there's a problem before anybody else. And so today, listeners of this podcast who have joined in, please, 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 please relinquish control to Jesus. Real